So I just want to quickly touch on what is it that would make cryptocurrency halal or haram, because I know that's going to be the foundation of the Islamic case for Bitcoin and for all cryptocurrencies. So in order to frame an Islamic ruling on something, the first question you need to ask yourself, is this an act of ibadah within of itself or not? So an act of ibadah within of itself, salah, zakah, hajj, fasting, those are acts of ibadah within of themselves. Then you have acts that are not acts of ibadah within themselves, but can become due to their intention. Eating, drinking, sleeping, your intention behind them is to get energy so that you can worship Allah, it becomes an act of ibadah. If your intention behind them is not present, or even for a dunyawi purpose, that's perfectly fine. You're just missing out on the reward, you're not being punished for it. So when we look at something like cryptocurrency, is it an inherent act of ibadah? Yes or no? What do you guys say? It is an inherent act of ibadah?
Yes.
Who said yes? You said yes? How? If I use cryptocurrency, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to reward me? وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Ahsan, this is an ayah from the Quran. But in using cryptocurrency, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to give me ajr?
Yeah, use it in halal way, you get ajr.
So with intention, but within of itself, no. Correct? So cryptocurrency and wealth in general is not an inherent act of ibadah. It is not an inherent act of ibadah. So now once you understand this, we have a default ruling that is established, which is the matters of the dunya are halal until proven haram, whereas matters of ibadah are haram until proven halal. So if someone comes to you and says, I'm going to pray 5 rak'ahs for Salatul Dhuhr, are they allowed to do so? They're not allowed to do so, because we know that Salatul Dhuhr is 4 rak'ahs. If they want to add something, they have to bring dalil for it. They have to bring evidence for it from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from the consensus of the companions. When it comes to eating and drinking, someone says, I want to drink water. Someone says, I want to drink juice. Do they have to bring evidence to prove that water is permissible or juice is permissible? They do not, because the default ruling is that it is halal until proven haram. So now once you've established this base case, we now go on to, are there any conditions that need to be met? Are there any conditions that need to be met? There are 5 conditions that need to be met. Some are specific to wealth, some are specific to cryptocurrencies. So with regards to wealth, there has to be a medium of exchange and a store of value. Medium of exchange, store of value. Firas spoke about that in his presentation, so I'm not going to repeat that. What becomes specific to cryptocurrency over here, and this is in contrast to the fiat system, is that wealth in Islam is meant to be deflationary by nature. So, Amanullah was speaking about the concept of inflation. You actually have 2 main schools of thoughts within economics. You have the Austrian school of thought, the Keynesian school of thought. One is pro-inflationary, one is pro-deflationary. The Islamic position is that it is actually meant to be deflationary based upon the fact that wealth in Islam is meant to be commodity-based. It is meant to be commodity-based. So now when you apply this to cryptocurrency, there's 2 main ways that they do this. You can have a limited supply, like you have for Bitcoin, 21 million approximately, or you can have a burn rate, meaning that as the amount increases, they burn parts of it to bring it back. So it makes cryptocurrency, not all of them, but at least Bitcoin and Ethereum, deflationary in nature. So that's number 3. Number 4, we talk about tokenomics, which is what exactly is happening with these cryptocurrencies. And the main thing we want to look at over here is that it's not a Ponzi-like scheme. So for example, I'm starting up a new cryptocurrency. I'm going to call it Navaid Coin. And I know Amanullah, mashallah, he's very connected in the community. So I tell Amanullah, you know what? Next week on the Mambar, I want you to really push out Navaid Coin. And for every person that buys Navaid Coin, I'm going to give you a percentage of it. And you saw this done with a whole bunch of influencers. And all those cryptocurrencies, went to nothing. So this is a Ponzi-esque scheme. So one of the things that we want to look at is that the tokenomics are not Ponzi-esque. So it's not a Ponzi scheme behind it. And then the last condition is that it has to have a real use case. So for Bitcoin, I will advocate is that it is a currency. Ethereum is a technology. And this is my very simplistic, limited understanding. Both of these are real use cases. But I come up with Navaid coin. What is the value of Navaid coin? What does it actually do? What purpose is it serving? Right? Other than the fact that I named it after myself. It has zero purpose, zero world usage whatsoever. Right? So in order for it to remain wealth in Islam and for it to remain halal, it has to have a real use case behind it. So now, this is the simplistic conditions. I'll give you an even simpler way. You're interested in a particular cryptocurrency. Is there a shortcut to finding out if it's halal? If it has a large market capitalization, Islamic Finance Guru has the top 50 cryptocurrencies by market capitalization that tell you if it's halal or haram, based upon these criterion. So all the major ones that you've heard of, like Solana, like Ethereum, like Dogecoin, all of those ones that have larger market capitalizations, they'll tell you if they're halal or haram. That is the simplistic way behind it. So with regards to what drives the price of Bitcoin and what makes it halal or haram in terms of its profit. So Bitcoin, as Firas mentioned, is most closely equated to a commodity. And the prices of commodities are driven by supply and demand. So the more demand that is created for the commodity, the more money people are willing to pay for it as the supply decreases. The more the supply increases and the demand decreases, then the more the price will drop. Now, I think something important to understand, what Bitcoin has working for it is the fact that not only are there a limited amount of approximately 21 million, but the fact that within the past year, 70% of Bitcoin has been illiquid, meaning it hasn't been transacted with. It's being stored and people are not using it. So only 30% of it is actually currently liquid, which means the supply has decreased and the usage of Bitcoin has increased, so the demand has gone even higher. So now the ETF is obviously a big discussion in the United States, that as soon as that becomes into play and becomes readily available, what the impact is going to be on that. A lot of economists are arguing that the price of those ETFs has already been taken into consideration, and that's what's driving it. But there are other forces as well, as other countries, coming into play. Argentina just had a major election, and this new prime minister of theirs is very inflationary mechanisms of currency. So he may not directly push for Bitcoin itself, but it will be one of the things that is encouraged. So that could be another thing. So there's a lot of things in play that will increase the demand of Bitcoin. And if you understand that only 30% of it is liquid, this will naturally drive the price up even further. Wallahu ta'ala alam. And your second question? Excellent. So with regards to staking, it's about how you're going to frame the cryptocurrency. So those that are framed as currencies and those that are framed as technologies. Starting off with the technologies, it's a much easier answer. It's as if you're renting out your technology. So you rent out your technology, you're receiving a reward back in return. That's not problematic whatsoever. Now, when a cryptocurrency is framed as a currency, if you rent out a currency and you're getting extra money on top back on that currency, isn't that the essence of riba? Inherently, the answer is yes. But the thing that needs to be looked at over here, are currencies like Bitcoin purely currencies in nature? Yes, the main case use of it is currency. But as you stake Bitcoin in this theoretical realm, are you strengthening the network as well? If you are strengthening the network, you're now using it for a technological purpose as opposed to lending money out and getting interest on return. So with regards to technologies, I think it has a very simplistic answer. With regards to currencies, or those cryptocurrencies that are primarily used as a means of exchange and a store of value, I think it's better to hold off until like a scholarly body issues a fatwa on something like that. But all that to say, there's a couple of individuals that I would recommend that people follow from an Islamic perspective. One is Mufti Faraz Adam out of the UK, and second is Sheikh Joe Bradford out of the United States. Both of them are doing a lot of work in this field, so constantly follow what the updates are on that issue. Wallahu ta'ala. No, not at all. So excellent. So let me translate your question. So the brother's question is, is Bitcoin basically a circumventing of Sharia compliancy in order to deal with interest? And the answer to that is no. Bitcoin is a unique commodity within of itself that is not trying to circumvent any systems or trying to circumvent any rules of the Sharia. In fact, I would advocate for the exact opposite of it. Whereas if you look at the major banks in Canada, how many of them took pro-Zionist stances and sent money to Israel? How many of them, actually public information, how many of them are directly investing into military usage and weaponry usage for the state of Israel, right? So now, this is the state of where we are placing our money, what is our accountability towards it, right? What is our responsibility towards it? So now you have something like Bitcoin. Again, I'm going to give this disclaimer again because I gave it during their session. I need to give it during this session as well. Anything that you hear in this session is not financial advice. We're not advocating for you to buy, sell, or to hold Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency. Please do your own due diligence. And any opinions that are shared here today by myself and Amanullah inclusively are not necessarily representative of the Islamic Information Society of Calgary itself, but are our own individual opinions. So now, going back to that question, I believe the point of today's session was to prove something like Bitcoin is more Islamic than any system that we have. Just because we're only accountable to it for ourselves. How I spend it and how I use it is my issue. But when you're putting your money in these banks, the way they spend it, we have a responsibility towards that. The fact that we're supporting riba indirectly, we have a responsibility towards that, right? So those are the bigger questions we're trying to answer with this event. And again, the point isn't to say that go out and buy Bitcoin, but the point is to think bigger about our money. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam tell us that our feet aren't going to move on the Day of Judgment till we're asked about 5 matters. How did we get our money and how did we spend it? A part of it is where are we placing our money? Right? So there's a level of responsibility that we need to take. But to answer your question, I don't believe it's tahayul and it is permissible. Wallahu ta'ala alam. I want to put Amanullah on the spot here. My question for you, sir, this is going back to a conversation we had that we never got to finish. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, on a realistic level, how does a country like Lebanon implement it, in summary? And then, how long do you think it would take to solve their inflationary problems?
Because the example I gave originally was if you were to start a country from scratch, the easiest thing is Bitcoin. Now, if you have a country in economic shambles, how do you implement Bitcoin? So if I were to dollarize an economy, I'd just airdrop a whole bunch of US dollars and people collect them and I go to the banks and whatever. Versus I would provide a X amount of electricity to Lebanese citizens where they can go and mine Bitcoin. So that's their way of receiving Bitcoin. If I have some sort of every Lebanese person has, X amount of resources every month, be it medical or, government stipends or whatever. I would give a portion of that to electricity consumption by a specific household where they can, mine. Of course, then you'd ask the question, the cost of mining and the initial capital to begin mining is something that may be prohibitive. That's when, agencies involved, uncorrupt agencies, ones that can, have a pool of funds, can generate enough, for the proportion of a specific jurisdiction or sort of riding or whatever. And rather than, back to Brother Ayad's point, rather than the rich and wealthy having access to that, that they call it the power grid of Bitcoin, everyone has access to it based on the number of, the household, number of people of household in that household rather than the wealth of that household. So that would be, in terms of injecting funds into the actual economy. Now the use of it is actually quite simple. Vendors, all of a sudden, instead of having cash registers, they would have just print out of a QR code that's tied to their address. And for those who have businesses, the point of sale devices that we use are quite expensive. So I'm already saving you a whole bunch of money by having a printout of your QR code that you don't have to touch any sort of fiat cash or anything like that. I literally scan that QR code and I transact with you. So in terms of printing the money, I think it's based on economic consumption and economic rationing, electricity rationing. In terms of the actual transacting with vendors, it'd be with that, call it that QR code solution. And in terms of the third thing is keeping governments responsible. This is the way to keep them responsible, because now at any point in time, I have a immutable public ledger that will tell me what is sitting in the war chest of the governments, how much funds they have, how much they've used, what are the plans for it, things like that. Is it sitting in the country? Is it not? Is it being used elsewhere? All of this is transparent. So I guess in summary, so an economy like Lebanon would benefit from the distribution of wealth, the interacting of wealth on a vendor level, and then thirdly, in terms of implementing it, it would keep governments as far as possible from the ability to corrupt and collude with one another.